Guys here? Are you guys back? If you guys are back, let me know. If you guys are back. All right. So, no, I don't think the Cabal did anything. I don't think the Cabal did anything. Um, I don't know exactly what happened. I had a phone call come in, which I turned down, and I think that glitched up the whole stream, which is pretty annoying. It's pretty annoying because I literally it was one ring, I closed it, and it broke the whole stream. I'm happy I was able to get back into this stream though because it seemed like that wasn't going to happen. It seemed like it was. I don't know what's going on. In other words, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if I'm on a new stream right now or if we're continuing the old one. But a lot of you guys are still here. Sucks. We had like 51 people. We lost it. We lost the whole crowd here. It's pretty shitty. Anyway, is what it is. Share the link. Let people know that we're rolling again. That we are rolling again. So anyway, what I was saying was that Tom Luongo's analysis is essentially that. Let me actually do this real quick. Let me just put on Twitter that we were back. That we're back, just in case anybody, maybe somebody, maybe it means something to somebody. Give me 1 second. All right. All right. So we have in Tom's theory, this is it was an attempt from Davos to put pressure on the Fed so that the Fed would back off on raising interest rates and that this was a hostage situation. Now I have to be honest with you guys, I'm not I'm I feel like I'm in some PhD course in global economics or finance or whatever. I mean, I'm loving it, but I'm still getting up to speed with this stuff. So I'm not completely uh, sure how legitimate this is one way or another. But I do think he's on to something. It is interesting that Credit Suisse would be targeted when Credit Suisse is a non-EU bank. And we know that Credit Suisse has a lot of business interests with, for instance, China. So Tom could be on to something with all of this. He could be on to something with it all. But what I'm going to tell you guys is what I'm thinking about is coming. So I was speaking to a good friend of mine, sold his home recently, and he was talking about is in the process of selling his home. And first off, in the course of just a few weeks from when buyer put down contract to when they got the house value assessment, the assessment of the house had dropped $40,000 because of how rapidly the market's going down. In addition to that, the adjuster said that he'd seen in the dot com bubble a 25 reduction in home values, and then with the global financial crisis a 50% reduction in home values. And he's saying with this, and it says it's all very mathematical, with this collapse, with this crisis coming imminently, what we are looking at is at minimum 65% to 80% decline in home values, which is really just such a, I mean, when I'm hearing this stuff, I mean, really think about that for a second. If you're somebody who put your home down, if you didn't have to put anything down on your home, you're already wiped out. You're already done. If you have an adjustable rate mortgage with the rates going up, you're already done. Even if you got a low mortgage rate, if your home value sees that kind of decline, a lot of people are not going to make it through that because they're still paying mortgage rates on a way, way, way more valuable house. So if any of them get unemployed, which is likely to happen, I'm going to tell you guys what I see because there's also a lot of Astro, and I can't recall or express the exact specifics of the Astro, but you guys, anybody who's interested in Astro can check out October 17th. October 17th looks like a very violent day. This is what I was speaking with Paul about. It's a very violent day. Not looking very good from, violence can be interpreted a lot of different ways, but one of the ways to interpret this is financial. And I'll remind you guys that the 17th of October is the Monday after Q3 reporting. Okay, Q3 reporting is on the 15th. So I think that if I'm going to put down a little bit of a bet, every day is a violent day to you. If I'm going to put down a bet on when I think the rug gets pulled out, I'm going to say that October 17th is a really good candidate. And that may not be the end of it because the Fed meets on November 2nd. And if this stuff is going on and the Fed raises rates after the November 2nd meeting, then we got another big wave coming. So when he said the 17th, I was just thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, that's 2 days after Q3 reporting. It's on a Monday. It's when the market's open. I think that this little brief recovery, and keep in mind, we're already down fairly substantially from the highs of last year. I think we're down like 20%, maybe 25%. But we're going to see, I think this is a short cover, basically. And what that means for laymen is that a lot of people who had bad positions in the market, this was a little bump to help them to cover their positions, essentially. It's going to get really bad. It's going to get really bad. But honestly, man, I mean, peeps, I don't know where to go. I don't know where to go. I mean, precious metals, maybe, as this thing gets sucked out, cryptos are maybe going to go back up. But man, I mean, you got it in land and you got that kind of reduction. You got inflation eating away even the dollar that you hold on to. This is crazy times. This is really, really crazy times we're living in. And what I'm going to tell people is, I think the only really solid advice that anybody can give at this point, which is stay alive. Because, we talked about this a little bit before about you have to be like a really professional swimmer to swim in these waters. I mean, a lot of people are going to be drowning. And if you can just simply stay alive, keep your head above water, you're going to come out in a fairly good position. That's my perspective on this. I think everybody should be prepared to lose a good amount. Well, yeah, so XRP, I mean, this is a really big question a lot of people are asking. And look, I've got some XRP. It's actually the only crypto I didn't sell. And the reason I didn't sell it is because I didn't hold a significant amount of it. So it wasn't like, but I got in at a really good price with XRP, and probably like at the actual bottom. But here's my issue with XRP. I mean, XRP is on the World Economic Forum site as a trusted partner. Like, Ripple is designed to be the backbone of Davos's CBDC. That's just what it is designed to be. I find it really interesting that they managed to make the big Ripple supporting community predominantly among the awakened people. And I remember it was Austin Steinbart was the first person who even mentioned the word Ripple to me. I'd never heard that word before until one of his shows in March 2020. So, I mean, that tells you all you need to know about where Austin came from. But what a crazy psyop. What a crazy psyop. I mean, we have a lot of questions about Vitaly, Buterin with Ethereum and its connections. Yeah, we have a lot of questions about that. Um, but at least ostensibly, Ethereum is decentralized. Ripple is by definition not decentralized. So I mean, look, I don't want to get into. I know it pisses off people when you talk about Ripple, um, but I'm. I think people have to come and face the facts. It's on the World Economic Forum's site. How can that be reconciled if it's on the World Economic Forum's website? It's being pushed by this group. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not selling mine yet because why sell it anything now? Um, I'll be honest. I've become kind of like I've cooled on crypto in general. Not entirely. I really do think that there's going to be another big run, and as we see a fiat collapse, I think that a lot of people are going to off ramp onto are going to off ramp onto crypto. Math 1989, just staying alive may be best achieved by staying in cash. Inflation versus stock crypto market downturn, which will lose more value in the same time frame. Well, it's exactly right. That's exactly right. But this is the thing, like economically, it seems like we're in one of those video games where, like, in order to get across the chasm, you have to jump from like one block to another, and if you jump on the wrong block, then you fall and you crash. But even if you jump on the right block, you have to then jump to the next right block because the block that you're on will eventually crash. This is the difficulty of the game, because the dollar is a great place to be right now. People are actually saying even better than the dollar is short-term treasuries, like one year treasuries, for instance. 1 year treasuries, because the presumption is that within 1 year that we're not going to go bankrupt, not going to default within the next year, and you get maybe like a 4% return, which helps to cut some of the inflation. But yeah, the point is that, okay, right now, dollar milkshake theory is going on. Dollar's becoming the strong currency in the world. Everything's pouring into the dollar. Okay, but that has a limit where that gets stopped, and then you have to jump someplace else. And at that point, is it gold, silver going up? Is it cryptos? That's Tom Longo's theory and a few other people's theories, and I think it makes sense, because if the dollar does then start going belly up along with the rest of fiat currency, people are going to be looking for an off ramp to it, and maybe at that point, we're going to start to have the hyperinflation cycle. I don't know. We haven't gotten there yet. I think when that happens, crypto will have more upside. But gold silver to me seems like the only. If we're talking just financial instruments and stuff, it seems like the only really safe hard asset, in the sense that you go from, like, right now it's not really pumping so much, but if you know that fiat's going to go, then you know that that's going to go up in value too. You know that any commodity is going to go up in value. So getting into a commodity at the low point is a good idea. And if we see that Russia and probably China are going to move towards gold-backed currencies, I think that that's a safe bet. It may not have as much upside as crypto, because crypto is going to have a serious pumping. It's easier to get into, but I'll be honest. I just have some skepticism about it. I have more skepticism than I had before, just because I haven't been convinced about how it can become a core part of the system without, like, will the powers that be ever allow, for instance, Bitcoin to be something that can be used in a general sense for exchange? Or if they do allow it, how does it get allowed without um, having some degree of co-opting to it? I understand all the arguments, the technical arguments with it, but it just seems like if they can't control it, they suppress it. Um, or what they would do is they'd allow it, but then they'd simultaneously have a currency that was backed by gold. So then the value proposition of it declines. Like Russia, for instance, is allowing Bitcoin, but for transactions, but you could see that as a tactical move to help undermine the dollar more. If the currency becomes backed by gold, people can feel like they can trust a state-based currency. Is the average person gonna use crypto? Because I'll be honest, I mean, for the average person, it's probably too complicated. It's probably too complicated. It's too easy to be lost and destroyed forever. I know this stuff is controversial, but I like to air it. I think it's important to air these arguments. Um, exactly as what Jeff's saying here, the trend globally, certainly among the anti-West faction, is to go by asset-backed currencies. It seems like crypto was, to some extent, the Davos plan, and they may have had their, their CBDC that was, that they'd have their CBDC, and maybe they would have other crypto like Bitcoin and stuff that also existed as sort of like more of a backdoor thing for certain individuals, that more tech savvy people would get around the CBDC structure using stuff like Bitcoin. I could see that have existed in this sort of universe. But if they revert back to asset backed currency. So anyway, I feel like the dollar is a really safe place to be right now, but from what I understand, this may not be the very bottom of what the gold silver price is going to be, but I think that's going to be a safe jump off point. I don't know how much it's going to go up, but I feel like at least you're not going to lose a ton there. So, it's tough. It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to figure out how it's going to go play out. Yeah, but this is Super Mario Bros. We're jumping from block to block. Each block is sinking underneath of us. Got to jump the next block. I mean, I got real estate last year, and fortunately, it was just land, and I don't have any mortgage on it. But I'm sure the value of that's going to go down. Probably going to go. I mean, was it a good investment in hindsight? Like, I feel like, don't ask me, right? Don't ask me. Who knows? Well, right. So silver has even more paper price manipulation than gold. Um, but again, to make a comment about silver and gold, gold seems to be where, like, I'm looking at what are the central banks doing, and the central banks are all accumulating gold, and they're not accumulating silver. I think Russia has a tiny, tiny bit of silver, but I don't know that any other central banks have any silver. And it seems like that the trend is that silver is becoming less money and more a practical commodity. So it seems like it's starting to replace copper as a bellwether in the commodity markets. Because silver now, over half of silver use is industrial. So silver is increasingly becoming an industrial metal. It's used for all sorts of electronics. So yes, I do think the price will go up, especially once the paper market manipulation disappears. I think silver has a lot of value, but is it going to be valued as a currency? I'm less convinced about that. Um, so so yeah, and Romeo, as you said, precious metal is a generational investment you hold for at least 20 years. It's an insurance policy also. I mean, that's really what it is. It's an insurance policy. I mean, even with land going down, and Jeff, as you're saying, income producing real estate is an outstanding play. If the real estate is producing things, I mean, I got to make my real estate do something, the land do something. It's not going to be worth much at this point. I suppose I could clear the whole thing and try to get some animals on it, but probably it's more timber. It's very wooded, so it's probably a timber play. Um, but the the big kind of point here with, that's why people wanted to go in the hard assets. But technically a stock's a hard asset so long as the company survives. Anyway, let's pivot because we know that the economic shit's coming. It's coming bad. You guys just stay safe. Keep your head above water. Keep your head above water. Don't do anything too risky. Make sure you got the things you need, which is food, shelter, some cash on hand to buy things you need, and loved ones. We're going to be going through some pretty crazy stuff. So let's pivot to geopolitical stuff at the moment. So the Russian-Ukraine war, the Russian-Ukraine, yeah, don't go to jail. Well, Bob, you and me should probably talk about that. Do what we say, not what we do, right? So the Russia-Ukraine war is really interesting right now. So we had Putin call. So we had the referenda. The 4 regions formally incorporated, I believe, yesterday. They were officially incorporated into the Russian Federation. But you look at it and you're like, well, what does it meant in practice? The Russian Twitter is understandably really pissed off because there is no Russian military anywhere. I mean, this is something that's really difficult to explain, and also, the pro-Ukraine people don't want to talk about it either, don't want to acknowledge exactly what's going on. But on the entire front, you have essentially 4 regions of engagement, let's say. 4 primary regions of engagement. You have the Kharkov area, which is Kharkov, Lugansk, and then you have Donbass, like proper, which is more like Donetsk, central Donetsk, like Bakhmut, Seversk kind of area. Then you have Zaporozhye. Mostly of this stuff is occurring on the western side near the river, although there is some other pockets as well. And then you have Kherson. Okay. So we have in Bakhmut, Donetsk area, there's been some marginal improvement from the Russians, kind of taking Bakhmut street by street. And this is mostly Wagner group, which is that basically mercenary army, which is underneath the auspices of the Russian military at this point. And then you have Zaporozhye, which has been more or less no movement whatsoever. And then you have Lugansk, Kharkov, Lugansk, and Kherson. And nobody really seems to understand what's going on, but essentially there are no Russian units on the front. I mean, it's like a skeleton crew. There are no Russian units on the front. Now, this is something that was not properly understood by people for much of this conflict, which is that in Phase 2, there have not been many Russian units on the battlefield even then. It's mostly been the militia, except in the south, in Kherson and Zaporozhye. But in the Donbass, there is really, with the exception of occasional Chechnyan forces and Wagner group to do special sweeping operations, and some Russian special forces. I mean, it's pretty much all militia along the entire front. In Kharkov, it was some very less impressive, less decorated LPR militia units, and Russian National Guard, which are basically SWAT teams that were defending that area. It's coming out that it may have been as little as 600 people were watching the entire Kharkov front. Nobody really knows what's going on. Russia just mobilized 300,000 men with 700,000 put on alert that they are going to be brought up. Very likely that they're going to be also called up. And while, sure, it's going to probably take, it's not going to take months, as some people said, but it could take a few weeks for some of these guys to get, brush the cobwebs off, get retrained, put in position. But, people have noticed that there's huge Russian reserves in Zaporozhye that have been moved in, across the Crimean Bridge. And yet, there are no Russian soldiers on the front lines. And so what you've been seeing happening was in the last week, after taking horrendous casualties getting there, don't get me wrong, it's looking to be maybe as, no less than 3,000 casualties on the Ukrainian side to take Lyman. But they took it because there was only 500 Russians defending it. There have not been a lot of Russians on the line. And the Ukrainians are throwing everything they have at it. They're taking substantial casualties. I mean, if you can, when we were looking in August we had Ukrainian casualties at 110,000. When I say casualties, I'm talking about casualties as in soldiers that are taken out of combat. So that means soldiers who have been killed or who have what are called sanitary losses, which are, blown off limbs and stuff like that. They're not returning to combat. They're alive, they're wounded technically, but they're not returning to combat. That was 110,000 on the Ukrainian side. Now we're looking at over 190,000. This is from the Russian Ministry of Defense, and the precision of the numbers suggests that they have a mole inside the Ukrainian interior service, which makes perfect sense. They have moles everywhere. It's one of the reasons, given that the Russians haven't been bombing a lot of those key centers, is because they have so many spies in the Ukrainian apparatus, which makes sense. I mean, I think Westerners still don't, I know you guys get it, but Westerners still haven't really internalized the fact that Ukraine and Russia were one country up until 30 years ago. And prior to that, they were essentially always one country. I mean, you can say, okay, part of Poland for periods of time. But the point here is that Ukrainians and Russians are heavily intermarried. It's essentially no different than if the United States lost the Cold War and the American South was separated from the American North. It was a separate country. So you'd have tons of intermarriage between the two places because it'd be only a 30-year difference, tons of history. So there's a lot of brothers fighting brothers. I mean, apparently there's a Russian general and a Ukrainian general who are brothers. It is like a civil war. It's the Ukrainian civil war is a microcosm of a bigger, almost Slavic civil war. This East Slavic civil war. This is not. I think when people say that, talk about them as being completely separate countries, I'm not trying to diminish any sort of Ukrainian identity, but if we're being realistic here, it's like a civil war. Okay. So Jeff, 110,000 casualties in around 6 to 7 months, but put this in perspective, if that's jumped to 190,000, we're looking at 80,000 more dead in the last 2 months, the last month and a half, basically, since the big offensives have begun. And that's not surprising given the amount that we've been, Russia still has artillery and air, still has, they still have superiority in that sense. Anyway, the point here, though, is that there are no Russian soldiers on the line. And so what's happening is that the Russians have now, like, you can make an argument that with the first thing in Kharkov when they retreated to the Oskil River in Lyman, that was a tactical retreat. You can make an argument that was understandable. What you see happening right now does not look particularly impressive, especially since all this territory that they're retreating from is now officially part of Russia. So in Kherson, Kherson is an area that you thought, well, they're not going to be able to launch a effective offensive in Kherson because, okay, in Kharkov, Lugansk area, heavily wooded, easier to, you know, it's easier to set up ambushes, to infiltrate. It's easier to avoid being spotted. In Kherson, it's all empty fields. And yet, the Ukrainians have managed to push the Russians back out of a significant position in the north because, again, there are no Russians on the line. You have in some positions, you have 50 men facing a couple thousand men. So the question is, what's going on? A lot of Russians don't understand what's going on, and they're getting pissed off about it. So it's so that's a funny quote, Jeff, about the USMC. So we don't know exactly what's happening. The argument in Kherson is that, well, now they shorten the length of their front. It doesn't fucking matter. You just had people participate in a referendum, and now you're going to let that territory get taken over by the Ukrainians who are going to punish them for it. I am very sympathetic to Russian sentiment here. I'm not saying that there isn't a plan, but it does seem like that there's been some sloppiness in logistics. And look, the Russians, is it possible that, I think the Russians have some really impressive weapons, and we're going to talk about one in a second, but there's still a lot of people in the Russian officer corps who are left over from the Soviet Union, who are lazy, incompetent. We've heard stories about this when it comes to recruitment with the draft, and actually, it's not really a draft. Let's be more precise. It's mobilization of reserves. It's no different than what we did in Iraq. I think that's important to state because people are thinking it's like a conscription thing. It's not conscription. These are all reservists, all people who had served. Now, you can get technical and you can say, well, conscription is mandatory in Russia, so the reservists, 1/3 of Russian males are going to be conscripted for 2 years because of the law. So they may be reservists, but they were conscripts before. Whatever. You can get pissy about it if you want to. But the point is that these are people with prior military training. And, there's been all sorts of ridiculous stories about them getting crappy equipment, random people being grabbed who don't really have much experience at all, or maybe served 20 years ago, like stupid shit. And the consensus seems to be it's come down to incompetence among some regional administrators. So, but the big point here is that, is there a lot of incompetence inside the Russian general staff? I think it's fair to say that there are some stupid people there, and there may be some fifth columnists. The youngest would have to be in their 50s, wouldn't they? Yeah, I think that's about right. But there are a lot of officers who are older. So, I've also heard some things about communications, that the Russians have pretty poor communications on the field. So they're easy to intercept. They're not very well distributed. I don't know what to make of this kind of stuff. People, I'm sure, can come up with some plan, some idea. I think it's a possibility that a lot of... So, for instance, I think a lot of Russian delays with this stuff have had to do with the geopolitical scenario, which Russia has been doing fantastic on diplomatically, really getting the world behind them, basically the world outside of the Western world behind them. But they haven't. But does that mean that they've executed everything perfectly? I don't think so. I don't think you can look at what's going on right now on the ground and think that this is being run competently. I'm not saying that it's anything strategically devastating. It's probably like they have to hold out another week or something like that before the Russian reserves get put in position. But it just seems really sloppily done that all these holes in the line have been made. It's possible that the Russians underestimated the Ukrainians attacking in such huge volumes, like human wave attacks. It's possible that they didn't think that, given their artillery advantage that the Ukrainians would attempt to do this. But you still need troops on the ground. Artillery is not enough. You still need troops on the ground. Yeah, Jeff, I was hearing some interesting stuff in Romeo. You're saying the same thing here. The Ukrainians have the same shitty equipment, with the exception of their special forces groups, which have more NATO-based stuff, and NATO communications equipment is very good. It's encrypted, etc. A lot of the Russian communication stuff is not. The Russians have been good at not having personal cell phone footage. They don't have the soldiers don't have cell phones on them, so there haven't been lots of leaks. Most of the Russian footage that you saw from the battlefield was coming from either the militias or was coming from professional film crews, like usually embedded with the Chechens or Wagner for propaganda purposes. The standard Russian army did not have any of that stuff. So, but so this is something that Putin's taking L's, and I think that you can make an argument for that tactically. But now let's take a step back and let's look at it strategically. The Ukrainians spent the last 4 months, let's say 4 to 5 months, sending soldiers to Poland, Britain, Germany to get trained and to get equipped. So while the Ukrainians sent tons and tons of conscripts to the front lines to basically just take artillery shells and try to hold the line, they were equipping a, let's say, 60,000 person army of professional army, let's say. And, of course, they still had conscripts and stuff that they'd throw in there too, but 60,000, professionally trained army again with completely re-equipped by NATO stockpiles. And that stuff has been thrown into the offensive this last month and a half, which has had some success against thinly defended Russian lines. But at what cost? I mean, if it's true that Ukraine lost 80,000 men, even if it wasn't that high, they've certainly lost half that. The numbers in the initial Kherson offensive were catastrophic. So this isn't sustainable. And this is a point that the Ukrainians, not that I blame them for attacking when they have this advantage to take some initiative, but the offensive is not sustainable, especially with the weather changing to mud season as we speak. They're going to be depleted. And if you look at, for instance, what's going on in Lugansk, with the Ukrainians now trying to push on this area, Kremenaya Sviatovo, which is basically, if that line falls, Lugansk is in some serious, serious difficulty. It'll go all the way to Starobilsk, which is basically the former Ukrainian capital of Lugansk when Lugansk proper was under the LPR's control. The point here is that if the Russians can't hold Sviatova, their whole line starts to collapse. It's very bad. But here's the thing. On the border of Ukraine, right there in Kharkov and Lugansk, right in Belgorod, there is an enormous massing of Russian soldiers. Enormous massing of Russian soldiers. So what it looks like is either they're there and they're just warning, they're not quite ready to go yet. But if the Ukrainians push further, the Russians can come right on their flank and completely encircle them. And I think it's likely something like that's going to happen. So yeah, I do think we are going to see moves from Russia soon. Is Russia going to wait until November or December? Because what you have in a terrain standpoint is that you have good movement in the summer, and then you have fall mud, and then you have spring mud. And it's much harder to advance during that time period. So while the ground is frozen, though, it's actually fairly easy to advance, and it'll favor the Russians tremendously with their artillery advantage because, unlike in the summer, there won't be tree cover. So I think the Ruskies will make a big move soon. I think that a big move is coming very quickly, and just a matter of weeks. It could be even less than that. The other thing here is the Poseidon submarine. This is like a doomsday submarine. It has the ability to fire nuclear-tipped torpedoes, which basically create a cascade effect that can create a quarter-mile-high tsunami. Um, so yeah, they could wipe out Britain. They could wipe out Florida, and the sub is completely undetectable. It's been sent out. Now, there's a lot of rumors about whether or not Russia is going to give an example of its new powerful weapon and whether it may even launch a tactical nuke just to send a signal. There has been, of course, this new big push. Everyone's getting iodine pills and radioactive material protection shit. Again, I don't think that we're having any nuclear war, and if we were, well, it was fun knowing you, COVID Cabal. It's fun knowing you because it doesn't really matter. I don't see any of that occurring for reasons we've already talked about. I don't believe that Biden controls ballistic missile command. There is this potential that the Cuban Missile Crisis situation that we have coming may be useful for the white hats at home to be able to make their move, to be able to actually receive command power. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I don't know. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me to see a nuke go off, but not in a military capacity, not in a directly engaged against troops. I can only see a nuke occurring if it's going to be in like a test situation so that people feel like it's real then. Yeah, tracking where the transatlantic undersea cables are. So that's another good point that I think is worth bringing up. That undersea cables are something that could be cut to cut off the internet, and also there's something called the Kessler effect, where Russia has a disadvantage to the United States when it comes to satellites. That's where U.S. really dominates, is in its satellite power. Russia could basically shoot up into space all sorts of objects that would destroy all the satellites up there. And this would be something that Cliff High actually talked about in his Alta reports as being predicted, which is, what do you call it? Snow globe Earth or something like that. But basically that the Earth would be covered with debris, surrounded by debris, which would make it so that you couldn't launch anything into space. Encapsulated Earth, that's the term, because there would be so much debris and it would take a really long time to clean it up. I think that's something that people haven't really thought about, that in the event we go to World War III, like let me just make this point real quick. I don't think we're going to World War III in the sense of like it being in comparison kinetically to the prior two world wars. But I think what this war in Ukraine is showing us is that really, really high-tech stuff doesn't matter that much at the end of the day. It has to be cheap to manufacture. It has to be effective and usable by people on the front lines. It has to be reliable. It's really nice to have a very integrated and advanced communications network, but the first thing that's going to happen in the event of a hot war with the United States and Russia is that Russia is going to blow apart all the satellites. They'll do this. There's nothing the U.S. can do to protect their satellites. All the satellites go down, and it's like warfare becomes more primitive. So if you have planes that rely on satellites to be able to do targeting and stuff, then the planes are not going to be as effective. Everything has to be independently reliable. It's good to have integrated stuff, but it can't be dependent on the integration to be effective. So what you see happening is like we're back to old school artillery shells and guns. It's like it's kind of boring. It just goes right back to how it used to be. So and for Diossier, I agree with you. We can't let nuclear war happen. We have a COVID cabal meetup to do. There was one other thing I wanted to ask here. I wanted to answer here Romeo, you asked me how do I rate the analysis of Scott Ritter, the Duran guys, Gonzalo Lira, legit. So I'll hit them all separately. I think Scott Ritter is, um, he knows his stuff, but Scott, I think, is, what's the word I'm looking for? He goes too little. He gets a little bit too much into the rhetorical flourish. Let's put it that way. I think that he overstates Russia's strengths, and um, he doesn't strike me as a very grounded person. Let me put it that way. He doesn't strike me as a very grounded person. So I'm not saying his analysis is necessarily wrong, but I've seen him make some really serious emotional swings, like when the U.S. started to give aid to Ukraine. He started to like freak out about the whole thing, and now he's trying to pretend he didn't freak out, but he did freak out. Um, so the Duran, I think, is great, very level-headed, very level-headed, and you just get a ton of value out of him. Big fan of the Duran. Um, Only blind spot I might have is I think that they don't always go quite as deep into the factionalism that Tom does, and I think that's where Tom Luongo's real value is he's able to really suss out the factions and consider some of these different scenarios. Um, Gonzalo is, I think, increasingly um, more ideological. And I'm not trying to go too far with that. He is a rational individual fundamentally. But I've started to see more and more of him, um, like when he's talked about like U.S. in a war with China, and how the U.S. doesn't stand a chance, and how China is completely going to overwhelm them, and China has all this. There's good points here, but there's also a lot of bad points. Uh, Vastly overstates the competency of the Chinese. Um, I think the Chinese could take out a U.S. carrier group for sure, but then the U.S. subs would decimate the entire Chinese coast, because the U.S. has by far the best submarine force in the world. So can China take out U.S. carrier groups 100% at heavy loss, and then they'll suffer bad retaliatory strikes? You know, I think that also Gonzalo is really disconnected from on the ground in America, and he's too online. He doesn't understand that there's a really substantial patriot growing pushback in the States. I think he's just written off the entire West, and I don't think that he has a sense of perspective about how things change, how populations awaken. And Alexander Mercouris on the Duran has kind of gently called him to task about this, about how you don't know how the populations, how things are going to change in a year. Because people, events change people. In America is already way closer than realized. So I think that the way to look at him, and even Pepe Escobar, who has incredible material on the global trade agreements, these are sort of part of the dissident left individuals. Gonzalo Lira is kind of more dissident left. And, the result of that is more of an instinctive contempt for the West. Or I'll just say, like, they're a little bit more negative on it than someone like Tom, who I think has it right. America is way more resilient than people are given credit. So, yeah, he was banned from Twitter. He's still in Kharkov. And I'll also say this, I'll give Gonzalo some credit. Gonzalo is super stressed. He's in Kharkov. Power's been cut out. He's chain smoking cigarettes now. He hasn't smoked in years. Harassed by the SBU. I think, he's not breaking. He's under stress. Like, I get it. I give him a lot of credit. He's Gonzalo Lira. His YouTube channel is Gonzalo Lira 2. So, last thing I think, I think last thing we'll just talk about here is that we're coming down to the final stretch. Little recap. We're looking at um, Trump arrest coming soon. It seems like we'll see. Midterms. Who knows what tricks are going to come up the sleeve. I think it's gonna build more and more and more until we get to the epicenter of it. Wano Savin thinks it's 29th of October. Um, if I had to guess, I would say it's closer to after, closer to November 8th itself. I would say it's there's an eclipse on the 25th and on the 8th. So I think anything in that window is fair game between the 25th and the 8th is fair game. But I'm a little bit more inclined to see. Um, we'll see. I don't know. Early November jives a bit more with me, but it's possible. Look. Let me end with this. The first Q posts took place on, I believe it was the 29th or 30th of October 2017. So it would be a really clean delta if it started at the very, very end of October and went through early November. Be very clean delta. So we'll see. There's debate, by the way, about what's going to actually entail with the military. So if you have the military deployed on the streets, let's say, hypothetical situation, MAGA is violent, MAGA is intimidating voters, so we have to postpone the election 30 days, and we need to have the military out there making it safe for people to vote by mail, whatever. I think that there's going to be I think it's possible that there's going to be some dispute in the beginning about on whose side the military actually is on. Is the military going to be deployed to stop a civil war from happening rather than, initially make a coup attempt against the government? I don't have any idea or knowledge of this stuff. I don't know. It's all speculative. I think it's going to become more clear as the weeks go by, as we get towards the end of the month. But I think we can all agree on one thing. It's coming. It's coming soon. You can feel it. You can feel it. All right, my friends. All right, my friends. We had oh, Romeo, I didn't know that he was divorced from his Ukrainian wife. That makes sense because he sounds a little bitter about that stuff. And did they divorce recently? Do you know that? And Jeff, yeah, Nancy Pelosi swears up and down the Dems will gain seats in the House and Senate. Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think they have it in the bag, but I think that's what they're going to try to do. They have a plan. I mean, Bill Gates, who told us in October, November of 2019 that there was going to be a really big global pandemic. Ha ha ha, thanks, Bill. You're so smart. He was able to predict that because he caused it. Same deal, though, when it comes to, he said that there's gonna be a civil war that's gonna break out in America after the midterm elections. That's what they want. They've always wanted a civil war. So don't be a fool. Don't turn your hand against your neighbor. Stay in sovereignty. We got this. Let's see what happens. All right. Appreciate you guys as always. Love y'all. See you next time.